Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. I'm so excited you're here today because we're diving into something that literally reshapes how we understand the human experience. We're talking about autism. But scratch what you probably already know. We aren't looking at it as some checklist of symptoms or behavioral traits. Instead, we are looking at autism as an entire, holistic biological architecture. It's all about how a person is built from the inside out, and why understanding this could completely change how you interact with the world.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover architecture over traits, the neurotypical environment, the hidden cost of masking, the body as environment, medical and biological mismatches, and finally, fixing systems, not people.
All right, Section 1, Architecture over Traits. We are completely redefining the autism framework here.
So, for literally decades, the go-to way to view autism was through this lens called the deficit framework. Basically, it treated autism like a list of behavioral errors and deficits. But systems scientists have pointed out a massive flaw here. This framework created interventions that targeted the totally wrong level of the system. It tried to suppress outputs instead of actually understanding the structure. Enter the Evolutionary Stress Framework, or ESF for short. This new model says, hey, autism is actually an underlying systemic and regulatory architecture. It's a fundamental blueprint shaping how a nervous system interacts with the demands of being alive.
Think about it like this. When public conversation only focuses on surface traits, things like sensory sensitivities, repetitive behaviors, or social differences, it's exactly like trying to describe a magnificent, insanely complex cathedral by merely reading off a list of its bricks. You entirely miss the structure that holds the whole thing together. Yeah, the traits are real, but they're just the outputs of a deeply coherent underlying system.
And get this, modern neuroscience is absolutely backing this up. Take a look at this brilliant quote from a 2026 paper in Trends in Cognitive Sciences. Fakhar and Astle point out that the human brain isn't optimized for just one single perfect objective, meaning atypical brains aren't broken or suboptimal versions of a normal brain. They are, quote, reweighted compromises in the same trade-off space. They're just navigating this massive biological landscape of possibilities differently. Weighted differently, not wrongly.
Moving on to Section 2, the neurotypical environment. This is really a cultural and political category.
We really need to flip the script on the word neurotypical. We usually treat it like it's the biological baseline, right? Like it's the default, and everyone else is just deviating from it. But the ESF treats this totally differently. Neurotypical is actually an environment. It's a sequestering of resources, assumptions, and design defaults that are built around one specific neurotype that just so happens to hold a social majority. Think about our schools, our offices, our 9-to-5 schedules. They actively select for one specific architecture while heavily taxing others. Honestly, think about your own office or classroom. Who is it really built for?
Now, what is truly fascinating here is how identity actually forms, because a nervous system doesn't just exist in a vacuum. The bio-neurotype you're born with bumps up against the world, and what crystallizes from that ongoing encounter is your emergent neurotype, basically your identity. So if you picture an autistic child moving through environments built for a totally different architecture, like a chaotic, noisy grocery store or a classroom with buzzing fluorescent lights, they aren't just feeling a bit uncomfortable. They are continuously learning about the huge gap between what their system needs to function and what the world is actually giving them. Their identity emerges right out of that friction.
Which brings us to Section 3, the hidden cost of masking, or, as I like to call it, death by 1,000 cuts.
Let's talk about a really critical concept called stress incoherence. This happens when a person's internal regulatory load is sky high, but their external social performance completely smooth. When an autistic person masks, effortfully suppressing their autistic traits just to fit in, it's not some character flaw or an act of deception. It is a necessary survival adaptation to an unaccommodating world. And let me tell you, it comes at a massive physiological cost.
Let's walk through the invisible steps of this death by 1,000 cuts, because no single demand is catastrophic on its own. The bright lights alone, manageable. The unpredictable schedule, manageable. The sensory friction, sure, manageable. But what happens when they all happen continuously, all at the exact same time? You get this invisible accumulation of stress that silently drains a finite resource we call regulatory bandwidth. The system is literally being drained way faster than it can ever recover.
And this overlaps powerfully with what's known as the double empathy problem. This concept explains that communication breakdowns between autistic and non-autistic folks aren't just a one-sided failure. They're mismatches between two different, perfectly valid meaning-making systems. The real issue here is the asymmetry.
The expectation that the autistic person has to do all of the translation work. Reading a room that wasn't built for you and then constructing acceptable responses is an enormous, exhausting drain on your regulatory capacity. So the crucial point is, what happens when we look beyond the social world? What happens when the social environment isn't the only thing imposing stress, but the physical body itself becomes the mismatched environment?
All right, Section 4, the body as environment. Let's look at biology and mismatches.
See, the body isn't just a neutral container. Autistic architecture is a whole body experience. It's in the immune system, the gut, the stress pathways, and just like social environments, our medical and physical defaults are calibrated to a neurotypical mean. We see this across so many distinct biological spheres: medication dosing and metabolism, the gut microbiome ecosystem, how the body processes fats and food, interoception, circadian rhythms, and essential rest-restore cycles. The sheer scope of this accumulating load is, well, it's staggering.
That takes us to Section 5, medical and biological mismatches. This is about good intentions causing iatrogenic harm.
Let's break down exactly what this means in practice across a few domains. Take medications, for example. Drug metabolism actually varies, and autistic people can show totally atypical patterns in how they clear drugs from their system. So a standard dose might be straight up toxic, or it might just not work at all. Or look at the microbiome. Treating gut issues as isolated comorbidities completely misses the fact that the chronic social stress we just talked about is actively disrupting the gut-brain axis. Even with food, standard dietary guidelines assume neurotypical interoception, which is how you read your own internal bodily signals, meaning an autistic person's natural hunger cues might be completely different. Treating an autistic body like a standard body that just has extra behavioral features, that causes direct harm.
And this brilliantly illustrates one of the most systemic mismatches of all: time itself. Industrial society strictly enforces a 9-to-5 schedule, but for a substantial number of autistic people, circadian rhythms run on a delayed biological clock. When society refuses to adjust to that, the 9-to-5 schedule stops being a neutral thing and becomes a systemic institutional stressor. Every single day, the body's regulatory systems are forced to run at a handicap. If you've ever had terrible jet lag, imagine feeling that baseline level of exhaustion every single day, just because society's clocks don't match your biology.
So all of this, the social masking, the metabolic mismatches, the chronic lack of protected low-demand rest, it compounds into a massive recovery deficit. And when that bandwidth account is chronically overdrawn for years, you hit what is called allostatic overload. You probably know it better as autistic burnout. It is absolutely crucial to understand that this is not some sudden psychiatric crisis. It is the predictable, mathematical collapse of a system that's been drained way faster than it can recover.
Finally, Section 6, fixing systems, not people. Let's look at the unified picture.
Systems scientist John Sterman really hit the nail on the head when he said, thoughtful leaders increasingly recognize that we are not only failing to solve the persistent problems we face, but are in fact causing them. By treating downstream symptoms and totally ignoring the root environmental and medical mismatches, our well-intentioned systems are exactly what's causing the harm.
So how does this build a better approach for the future? Well, the old model asked super narrow questions like, what medication targets this specific anxiety symptom? Or is there an underlying sleep disorder? The new model, guided by the Evolutionary Stress Framework, gives us a vastly better map. It asks system-aware questions. What is driving the overall regulatory load? And hey, can we reduce that at the source? It's all about recognizing the whole body ecology of a nervous system that isn't disordered. It's just different.
Which brings us to our final and definitely most important thought. Once you realize that the deficit framework mistakes difference for damage, the whole conversation shifts. The question is no longer, how do we fix the deviation? The question we really have to ask ourselves now is, how do we build a world that has room for more than one kind of system? It's a design question, it's a political question, and it's an incredibly human one. Let's stop pathologizing difference and start fixing our environments. Thank you so much for hanging out with me on this explainer. Stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.